friends. Today's read aloud is this really cute book. It's about a mouse. It's called Norman the Doorman, and it is by Don Freeman. Somebody sent me a message. Norman the Doorman. To Doyle and David, Hillary and Tony, Wiggy and Toonie, Stevie and Sarah, Bernard and Curtis, and with 2 pieces of cheese for my nieces Donna and Patty. He's cute. In front of a small, well-hidden hole around and back of the Majestic Museum of Art, there once stood a mouse named Norman. Norman was a doorman, and he greeted all of the art-loving creatures who came to see the treasures which were kept in the basement of the museum. "Come right in," Norman would say to his cousins, the Petrinis. "We're quite safe. I've sprung all the traps." Hey, this reminds me of a different book that we read. Do you guys know what I'm thinking of? It was a different book about a mouse who went to an art museum, and that was Matthew's Dream. We read that a few weeks ago. Norman would explain every painting in detail and handle each masterpiece with as much care and respect as if he had painted it himself. He would also take great pride in pointing out the artistic features of certain pieces of Greek sculpture which rested in the dark corners of the storage room. Norman's only worry was keeping out of sight of the sharp-eyed upstairs guard, who often came to the basement to set traps for mice. His bright flashlight frightened the visitors, and they dashed out the secret hole into the night like streaks of pink and white lightning. As for Norman, he always managed to escape and hide inside an old armored knight's helmet. Up there, he felt perfectly safe. Actually, the helmet was Norman's home, which he had made into a very comfortable and workable studio. Just see what a splendid skylight the visor made. I was going to read that as visor at first, but my brain caught it before my mouth said it and realized that visor doesn't make sense. But I do know the word visor, so I tried it 2 ways quickly inside my brain. Visor, like a visor hat that you would wear. Like most everybody, Norman had a hobby. Each night after work, he tried to create something pleasing or beautiful, perhaps a painting of a Swiss cheese and crackers or a statue. Wow, just like Matthew, who was also a painter. One bitter cold day, Norman decided to stay in his studio and make something out of wire. For some time, he had been collecting mouse traps and old scraps of picture hanging wire with the intention of putting them to artistic use. The mouse traps weren't any good anymore, since Norman had cleverly taken out the piece of cheese and then snapped the traps shut without having harmed even so much as a whisker on his nose. All through the day and far into the night, Norman twisted and bent wires into many strange and mysterious shapes, until at last he created something he was really proud of. It looked for all the world like the mouse on a trapeze. It does. That night, when he finally went to sleep, he was a tired but very happy mouse. Early next morning, when Norman went outside to shovel away the snow in front of his doorway, he noticed a man reading a sign nearby. He too read the sign: "Sculpture contest, open to all artists, great and small. Prizes, prizes! Works in stone, iron, bronze, wood, or wire welcome. Last day today." Back he flew. Why can't I show my wire statue? He asked as he slid through his visor lid opening. Well, but what would he call it? All pieces must have titles, he well knew. Suddenly, he had an inspiration. Stripping off the printed word trap from the label and then ripping off the letters ease from the word cheese, he pasted them together. Trap ease. Now he had a fitting title for his wire work. Although Norman was a modest mouse, he practically burst a button off his coat. That means, like, um, when he's bursting a button off his coat, I'm imagining that, and it means that his chest would be like really puffed up and swollen, so that his button would fly off. If he's puffing his chest up, that means that he's proud. Like when you're really proud of something, you kind of stand up straight. Yeah, I'm proud. Then, as this was the last day for the artists to bring their sculpture pieces in, Norman put a cover over his statue, as he had seen the others do, and away he scooted. Up the front stairway he climbed, one snowy step at a time. Once inside the huge museum, he eagerly followed the other sculptors from one room to another. He still had to be extremely careful of the sharp eyed guard. Contest or not, he didn't want to get caught. After carefully removing the cover from his wire statue, he left it on the floor with the rest of the contestants' work. Just before leaving, however, he took one last look. Would the judges for the contest notice his trapeze? After all, it wasn't very large. Out he went into the snowy afternoon, knowing he had done his best. Back once more in his helmet studio, Norman went about sewing new brass buttons on his blue coat. You see, he had not forgotten that he was a doorman who had a job to do. Meanwhile, upstairs in the sculpture gallery of the museum, the judges were busy judging. Quietly and seriously, they examined each piece, trying to find which ones deserved prizes. I said delivered because I saw the DE, and then I thought to myself, that doesn't make sense. It doesn't make sense to deliver prizes. Which ones delivered prizes? So it's which ones deserved prizes. I had to go back and take a second look. Gradually, they found themselves huddled around a certain statue. Now, this is an amazing creation, exclaimed one of the judges. There's no name, said another. And isn't it a shame it's so tiny? Yes, but remember, the contest is open to great and small, said another judge. One by one, each guard, when asked if he knew who had brought it in, shook his head and said, No, not I. The museum director couldn't understand why none of them had caught sight of the artist. But when the sharp-eyed guard took a closer look, he gasped, Oh, so this is where all my mousetraps have been going. I think I know where to start looking for the tricky trap snatcher. Without waiting another minute, the guard snapped on his flashlight and hurried downstairs to the basement. Look at the detail. What's this? One of my traps stuck in a knight's helmet. He lifted up the visor to investigate. There, inside, he saw pieces of wire and parts of traps, and strangest of all, a neat little bed which could only belong to a mouse. Whoever he is, he must be mighty fond of my cheese, said the guard as he knelt down on the floor and pointed the flashlight at some tracks which led out through the hole in the wall. During all this time, Norman had been tending to his duty as a doorman. A party of mice from the country for whom he had been waiting was long past due, and he was getting mighty cold and hungry. It's a big sentence, but it means that there's a group of mice coming from the country, and he was waiting on them, and they were late, so he's getting cold and hungry. But to his surprise, who should be coming around the corner but the sharp-eyed guard? "Oh ho, so there you are," said the guard as Norman fled inside. But when the guard held a piece of cheese just above the hole and Norman sniffed it, he couldn't help poking his nose out to get a better whiff. And just as he was about to reach up and snatch the cheese, a hand came down swiftly and caught Norman by his tail. "Say, are you the rascal who's been taking my mouse traps every day and using them for artistic purposes?" asked the guard sternly. "It's just a hobby," sobbed Norman. "Just my hobby." Right then and there, the guard tossed Norman up on his shoulders, but he still kept a tight hold on his tail. Norman was sure he was being taken to jail. You can imagine his surprise when, instead, they entered the museum and heard all the artists all clapping and cheering. "Hooray for trapeze!" they shouted. "Hooray for trapeze!" "Well, I'll be bamboozled," cried the guard. "I do believe you've won a prize, and they're waiting for you to step forward and receive the award." Awarded first prize for wire. The guard rushed up to the judge's platform and said proudly, "Here's the winner. I found him freezing outdoors in the snow." Do you think that the guard really knew that he was going to get an award? Because before he seemed kind of mean, like he was trying to catch him. Now, and then here he looks surprised. But then now he's telling a fib and he is like, "Oh, I rescued him from the snow." But I think that really he was trying to snatch him. But then he found out that he got a prize and he tried to pretend like he was the helper. "Oh, indeed," said the head judge, somewhat flustered. "Why, yes. Who could have created the darling young mouse on the flying trapeze? What is your name, my good fellow, and what would you like for your prize?" "If you please, sir, my name is Norman. I'm the doorman downstairs, and I've always dreamed of seeing the upstairs part of the museum without getting caught. That is what I would like best." The simple request was granted immediately. Amidst great applause, the guard led Norman out into the hall, where together they began a grand tour of the entire art museum. Later that night, when Norman returned to his door downstairs, he found his mice friends from the country waiting for him there. Of course, Norman invited them into his studio where he shared with them an enormous slice of cheddar cheese, a present given to him by the kind-hearted guard. Oh, what a wonderful way to end the day. Good night. That was a fun book. I like that it was similar to Matthew's dream. They both had a dream of being an artist, and they both were mice, and they both visited a museum. I hope that you guys have enjoyed some of the virtual museum trips that you've been going on in remote learning.